All right, good.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024. We're resuming our work on Bill S311. And before we get started, I just wanted to do some community housekeeping. So Mr. Farrell sent us the priority housing project flow chart last week.
Yes.
And here are copies.
You're gonna trust me to take care of the one you sent originally?
But yeah, this is, so we have one for your kitchen as well as one for your committee room. And the other was that, we got a lengthy letter from the village of North Bennington. And I thought there was a lot of information in it, so it'd be helpful to have it in hard copy before.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to do is just briefly talk about schedule, just for air traffic control. So we have 311, we'll be working on that this week and into next. But by next week, 687 ought to arrive. So the House bill of environment and energy. So we'll get that bill introduced by the end of next week, probably next Thursday tentatively. And so as we're going forward on 311, as we're blending that in, I just want to reiterate offer / request that committee members, like, what questions do we have that we want to get answers, and who do we want to hear from? So that if you have any agenda requests, so that we can all be thinking together about what kind of testimony we need, although we have ample, we don't have expert. The other thing was just every senator is welcome to do whatever they want. I'm just mentioning that we are gonna be increasingly under pressure to before we finish our work, to adopt positions being argued by people from outside the room. And I would encourage us all to not make promises till we're finished, because your life has been like mine lately. There are people who are many suggestions for what we might do or not do, and because we haven't worked on stuff. I'm just encouraging people not to sort of get themselves into a predicament. The last thing after 687, sorry, I mentioned the third thing on the horizon is the RES, the Renewable Energy Standard, which is also coming out of the House. I stopped into the Pro Tem's office this morning to find out what our last full committee day will be, the morning committee, since we've been shut down earlier than as a whole. Although thankfully the last few years we've been able to do things like meet from 8 to 9, so we have a smaller window, but we are able to keep things moving. And we should have a date by the end of the day. But I'm just saying that now because although we just passed crossover, it's not all that far away that we'll also be hearing about our, as a morning committee, we going full morning exam, probably a month from now. And that means like 16 weeks, so many days. All right, so that's the housekeeping stuff. And with that, let's return to our guests who are helping us learn more about their perspective on 311, things they like, things of concern, and what thoughts. And we'll start with Mr. Stevens. Thank you for coming back. Sorry that we had to reschedule. The schedule got a little jammed up last week.
I understand, and that's part of the work. So, thank you for having me and having me on a little bit earlier than we planned. For the record, Gus Seelig, I'm the director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And as you can see, I'm an old guy, so I'm going to give you a little bit of history. Because I've been at this and I've gotten involved in the suit. And HCP is a quasi-public, we are a funder of affordable housing, but also, and we've done just about 16,000 homes and apartments, and shelter beds and special facilities all over the state.
We're thousands.
Just under 16,000, we'll cross 16,000 before we finish this fiscal year.
So
But we've also conserved about 450,000 acres of the Vermont countryside, and our enabling statute asks us to do both those things, to do it in a balanced way, and really, from the very onset, in 1987, we were viewed as an organization that was to practice, although this term didn't exist, smart growth. And back when there was a Vermont Forum on Sprawl, and Smart Growth Vermont, and they were evaluating public agencies, they gave us their highest rating for making smart growth investments. And that's fundamentally what we have tried to do, is to do both protect the working landscape and natural areas and natural communities, as well as to build where it's appropriate to build. So my perspective crosses the mission of this committee to, I think, to those goals. When you look back at the history, in that,
quick question.
Yeah.
So that makes you the largest developer in the state.
we're not a developer, we're a funder.
Okay.
So organizations like, Evernorth, when you heard from last week, or the Downstreet Housing, come to us with applications, but we set priorities that focus on where are the most important places to build, where are we gonna get the most bang for our buck, how do we encourage smart growth and vibrant communities. So, we're looking at this city, we could take a 20-minute walk and we'd see the transit center here in the downtown, and the Aubuchon block where the upstairs spaces were vacant for 75 years, and redevelopment along Berry Street where there used to be a granite shed across from the co-op. So we're trying to build in those kinds of places. Trying to take underutilized assets. And when we build new, we try to do infill sites. We try to build in smart growth locations, but all of that is part of what our mission is.
So 87, that was under the last year of the Cunin administration, is that right? Or
No.
who was in that?
Governor Cunin was in, but was not her last year. She served through 1990. And the perspective I'll bring you from history, and I just would say, we all know that Act 250, I think, is a very important law, fundamental to who Vermont is today, and has done a lot of good. And at your joint hearing, I told you I was glad because of Act 250 that Walmart located in downtown Rutland, and that has made an enormous difference to the vibrancy of that community. I'm glad that I can sit at exit 4 and Walesdales are back where they belong, and Randolph is becoming more and more vibrant every day. So I'm not here as a critic of Act 250 at all. But when Act 250 was passed, you all know that the passage of the statewide land use plan failed. There was a second attempt to bring that about, and that failed. Year after we were created, and Senator McDonald, my recollection is, we were very involved in Act 200. That was an attempt by the Cunin administration to really beef up regional and local planning, and to have a bottoms-up land use process. Since that time, you developed a downtown program, downtown tax credits, and then a series of designation programs for new neighborhoods, neighborhood development areas, village centers, all of that kind of stuff. And I guess what I would say to you as we approach 311 is that we need to build on that bottoms-up planning to provide the housing we need today. And I want to say a few words about need. We're in a very different place than we were in the 1970s in Vermont, when housing and real estate was relatively inexpensive. I bought my first house in East Calais in 1978 for a little $26,500. If that house were on the market today, it would be on the market for $400,000. So the real estate economy has changed dramatically. And the cost basis just in the last 3 years to build anything is dramatically different. So if I were looking at what used to be called the block in Windsor, which cost us nearly $300,000 per apartment. It would cost double today to do that. Costs are just completely out of control for reasons Vermont cannot control. The only good news in that is carpenters who were making $30 an hour in 2016 are now making $60 and $70 an hour.
I gotta talk to my boss.
Yes.
I gotta talk to the son.
And they deserve it, they deserve to make a good living, but we're in a very different landscape. When Act 250 was passed, we didn't have a single shelter operating in the state of Vermont. We didn't need a shelter system. We have a shelter system today and it is inadequate. We found that in the pandemic that we do not have enough places for people to live. People are having just a really difficult time. The Agency of Human Services and DHCD are reporting that today we have a shortage of 6,800 homes across the state. Back during the Shumlin years, you actually added to the statutes to say that communities could not discriminate based on who was going to live in a unit when they were doing their permitting. Last year in Act 47, you told municipalities they could no longer, they had to provide in their zoning a place in any community where a shelter could be located. My pitch to you a year and a half ago at the briefing that Joint Fiscal invited me to give to the whole legislature and again this year was that we really need to shorten the appeals process. And I'm not opposed, Senator, as you asked last week, to appeals, but they can drag on interminably and the court system is very expensive. We need to encourage density, which is the friend of the environment, because if we concentrate our development, we're gonna have we're gonna relieve pressure on open space. And the first farmer who served on our board, basically when he retired, said, I didn't know how this housing and conservation stuff was gonna work out. And Governor Cunin asked me to join the board, but he really taken the pressure off of the working landscape by focusing on the downtowns and village centers and the adjoining lands to them. So as you look at 311,
Sorry, I wanted to fill in something in my notes. You were talking about the Windsor block, 300K when you did it. It's like double that now. How old is the Windsor block?
Early 20th century.
it was done about 2010 in that era.
Okay.
But what I would tell you is that was like the most expensive project at that time.
Yeah.
It was well above the norm, but what I would tell you is from the point we passed the housing revenue bond in 2017, costs have doubled on new construction, not to mention difficult historic rehabs.
2017 was $37 million bond.
$37 million bond. So we're just in a completely different place in terms of what it costs to build houses. One of the things, I think Academy Meyer gave you some really excellent testimony. I think a couple things I want to emphasize that she might not have is when she's taking a project through development, one, she's not spending necessarily private sector money, but public sector money as a nonprofit being funded by us, by the Department of Urban Development, through federal tax credit. So when projects become more expensive, the private sector is not losing money on a deal like that she's working on. She is. The cost of carrying a mid-sized project from development to a shoveling ground might be somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, depending on its size. And it's not just all the soft costs of not just permitting, but your design professionals and your staff work on it as they interact with local officials and the state agencies. So when she says we don't want to incur costs until we know we have a project, it's not that she's trying to be risk averse, it's that she's trying to be a good steward of the public funds. And it's not wise to spend that money when you don't know that you're going to have a project. And that's part of the reason that she's telling you that there's a delay. Not so much from what the Natural Resources Board does, but that why would you incur that cost if you don't know, you're gonna have your local permits or stormwater permits or any of your other permits. So she's trying to be a good steward of public funds when she's telling you she's not filing for Act 250 right at the beginning. Okay,
Can you say, explain a little, I realize as you say that, I don't quite know how the money. Not all the detail on how the money works, so there's the public phase money, I mean, the public dollars that support that development phase. So then, let's say that all the permits issue, now that construction happens. Is this like building a home where you have a construction loan and it rolls over to a mortgage?
that's right. And you know, the cost of construction loans over the last 3 years has gone from 3% to about 9%. So if you've got a 10, 15, $20 million project, just construction interest is part of what's driving what I'm telling you is the Dublin cost. And then if you add a supply chain interruption, it has been just a horror show to get elevators installed in a timely way. So we did a deal in St. Johnsbury, big downtown block. And it was supposed to be done in June, and the elevator didn't arrive until September, and then the people who installed the elevators couldn't arrive until October. So 4 more months of construction interest on a 40-unit development that you know, was $12–15,000 project. So all of that just makes the work of getting to housing our citizens and our most vulnerable citizens harder than it used to be and more expensive.
So that elevator delay, does that mean for the most part, the building was ready for occupancy, other than you couldn't pass 88 codes or whatever, because you didn't have an
You
elevator.
couldn't get your building, your certificate of occupancy, so there was that for a whole variety of reasons, not just ADA. So, yeah, you couldn't occupy the building, so you couldn't get your investors who were investing in the tax credits to pay in, you couldn't get your permanent mortgage, you had to keep paying that 9% interest. If that were, you know, not in that situation, because that was done before interest rates went up, but in any situation today.
And what are you seeing for mortgage rates, or what are your partners seeing for mortgage rates for the permanent funding?
That's a great question to ask Maura Collins, but they've gone up. And what I can tell you is for single family mortgages pre-pandemic, we were at about 3%, and today we're a shade under 7%. So mortgage rates have doubled. I don't know for commercial buildings exactly, or for rental properties. I don't know quite where we are today, but they have absolutely not. At any rate, I guess what I wanted to say to you is I really think that those 3 things, I think that 311 has in it of encouraging. There are 3 things in 311 that, without getting into the weeds, are very important. One is that it encourages density. The second is that it tries to shorten the appeal process, maybe not in the way that I would have chosen. I recommended that the committee look at, and they did take testimony, a model in New Hampshire called the Housing Board of Appeals. That's been working to great effect there from all the testimony I've heard. They didn't feel that there was enough here to stand up a separate new board that would need to be funded. But I think shortening the appeals process is really important.
So the New Hampshire model is a separate board.
Yeah, in the same way we have a human services board, or we have a labor board, it's a quasi judicial process. When one goes into the judicial process for an appeal, you know, the worst example of this was the project in Woodstock, Vermont, that made 2.5 trips to the Supreme Court over a decade. And well, I don't think we can generalize about people's intentions when they appeal, and I believe, as I said, people have the right to say government made a mistake, I want to be heard. They should be heard, but 10 years is, in this case, I actually sat next to one of the appellants at a community meeting in Woodstock before the project was underway. And that person said in no uncertain terms, he will know who I was. Over his dead body, was that kind of project ever gonna get built? You know, so some people really don't, and I've heard this across my career when I was at Community Action, people really resisting housing for folks of modest means. having housing in their communities. We just went through and we fixed this in Act 47. But Hartford told the shelter that they could not build housing across the street from their existing shelter, couldn't build an additional shelter right across the street. It was going to hurt the character of the neighborhood. The neighborhood already had a shelter, so you've changed that in Act 47. But I guess I say to you, not every intention of every appellant is simply this is environmental and friendly. So I think we need to figure out how to shorten the appeals processes. In the Putney case, which Kathy did mention, and I think this speaks to how do you, as policymakers, get to the right balance. The community went and had a process in which they decided they were going to designate an area for growth. That was a democratic process. That had to be affirmed through the Regional Planning Commission and then approved at the state level by, is it the Downtown Board? Chris? The Downtown Development Board. So lots of opportunities for people to say, I object, this is the wrong place for our community to grow. Although in this case, it's right across from the food co-op and there's lots of other stuff. So, the same person who is in rental housing nearby, maybe abutting, made an appeal. The judge, by summary judgment, decided it was not worth leave a trial, said, no, you don't have grounds. She went to the Supreme Court. No, they did that pretty fast, I think about 15, 16 months, faster than usual. She then went back and appealed the jurisdictional opinion of Act 250. She's lost again in environmental court. She's appealing the Supreme Court. The consequence of that 25-unit development will be an increased cost of at least $2.5 million. It's an affordable housing development. Putney is a community that in literature of affordable housing, one would call moving to opportunity community, as opposed to segregating people of modest means in places where there isn't opportunity, where you don't have a mix of incomes. So again, I'm not going to say that the solutions that SED, Senate Economic Development, proposed on the appeals processes are perfect, but I think as you reckon with what they have proposed and the bill that comes over from the House, it is critical that we find ways to shorten the appeals process, however you do it. It's just fundamental to the need to meet the needs of working Vermonters. I was showing a slide in the across the hall in the Appropriations Committee yesterday. Average childcare worker in the state of Vermont makes $30,000. Average elementary school teacher is about 60,000. So is a police officer. The market is producing housing at a rate that none of those occupations can. Okay, so we will need, and then the third thing that is in this bill is not enough, in my opinion, but there is revenue in this bill to help us build more housing. And Chair Kitchell was quite clear with me yesterday, the budget, that we are really constrained. And so I think I would just say to you, if you don't want to be disappointed in the results we give you in the coming years, now that ARPA funds are gone and big surpluses are gone, we've got to look at the issue of how do we bring the cost of affordable housing down, and that's going to require continued public investment, in my opinion. So I think I've covered what's different today, why I think that acting on this is important. We've indicated, Mr. Chairman, you're going to be looking at the bill that comes from another body. You're going to be looking at 311. There'll also be a housing bill that comes over. I think so. I think all of that is important. Two issues that I want to add to your consideration is one, in 311, there is a proposed study of the ag mitigation program, and I'm happy to give you a brief explanation of how ag mitigation works. But under 9B, from the beginning, if you're going to develop primary or secondary primary ag soils, which are both prime and state-run soils, you had to mitigate. And for the first 15 years or 20 years, that was done on site. And what that ended up doing was creating parcels that Chuck Ross, when he was ag secretary, was called stranded parcels. So you build a big development and there'd be 10 acres of lawn around it because you had to mitigate on site. It wasn't necessarily being farmed. Around 1990, a Franklin County developer walked into our offices and the 250 offices and said, "You started to buy development rights in Franklin County. Instead of making me mitigate on site, why don't I pay in to that process? Pay into a fund and you can mitigate in farmland." The Act 250 folks thought that was a good idea. The ag agency is the statutory party, so they had to oversee a process, and that began the process of letting developers mitigate by making payment rather than on site. Around 2000, you memorialized that statute, gave the ag agency some of the funds, participated in the Act 250 process. We've received over the years about $7.7 million that has been invested in the conservation of about 16,000 acres, matched by federal funds and sometimes by state funds. So in bill that's passed, there's a proposal to have the Commerce Agency look at and make recommendations because ag mitigation is eliminated in certain locations. And we would just suggest that the ag agency probably needs to be the party that has the expertise to do that.
Who do you usually work with in ag? Well, I can't touch with secretary, but is there a point person that you can just name who does their mitigation?
I believe, I think it's
Ari Rockland Miller.
Was it?
So Ari Rockland Miller,
I think we do know.
Chris Hoffman from the department.
There's also a proposed study in the bill that you'll get from the other body on what to do with the loss of priority housing projects. And I think that that's not something that's in the Senate bill, but to look at. And what priority housing projects done up to now has been to reduce the time and cost related to Act 250, but also provided to private developers an incentive to work with nonprofits to actually produce affordable housing rather than market rate housing. We've done a number of what we call turnkey deals with the private sector using that process. So we think that that's an important addition to add. So with that, I think I'm going to stop my testimony.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer additional questions. I'm happy to come back. I am not an attorney. I have not followed every inch of the bill that SED produced, but we'll try to be helpful. I think that if we're going to meet the needs of Vermonters today, we need a process that recognizes the planning that happens at the local level. And I guess the question I would ask you to think about is how do you, as you think about the planning that we're investing in through the designation programs, is when is there too much democracy? If you get the locals to say, here's where we want to grow, and you get the regional planning commission to sign off on it, and then the downtown board signs off on it. When do we stop saying that every permit is a matter of negotiation in terms of density? The development that took 10 years and 2.5 trips to the Supreme Court in Woodstock was supposed to be built at half the density that Woodstock would have allowed. Nobody was trying to say we want to maximize the density. It's right across from Middle and High School. I think a good location for families. But again, 10 years because somebody had access to an attorney who worked free, and he was very, very good.
How many you recall how many units the Woodstock project published?
I believe it's 36 rental units, and we're now about to do, I think it's going to end up being 8 homeownership units. I think we just funded the last 4 homeownership units that will get built. They're starting this summer or fall.
Great, cool. Thank you so much. I know that I'm glad you brought up PHPs, because that was on my list, and we flagged that already in here, like why this was one of the. It worried me in terms of we wandered, I think, between the word affordable housing. We don't always necessarily have like there's compete necessarily with one another, but when we drift away from priority housing, it seems like sometimes we forget the affordability piece of it.
You know, from my perspective, I think it's very important to be focused on the affordable piece, but I do want to say that the housing market is a market.
Right.
And so what housing economists will tell you is when people can't enter the homeownership market, and we do homeownership as part of our program, and Senator White's very familiar with it. But when people can't access that market, it means that they are competing with people on fixed incomes in the rental market. So getting people who earn 80, 90, 100,000 into the home ownership market is actually a help to the rental market that is so pressured today that, you know, we're seeing out-of-state investors, you know, buying what are called Class B properties and, you know, in raising rents dramatically. We preserved the development in South Burlington some years ago that had never been subsidized, but home to lots of new Americans and other working families, and rents there are about $1,300, $1,400 a month with a very small investment. Had it been sold to an investor in what are called Class B properties, because there's 99 units, the rents would have been transformed to over $2,000 a month. So we prevented homelessness for a population of working Vermonters by making that investment.
Median income in Vermont supports what level of purchase in the market is combined housing? The ballpark.
We could get our chart out, yeah, the whole little.
Yeah, Maura Collins showed you a chart when we did our orientation, but by today's prices, we are now down, and today's interest rates, we're down to about what are estimated in broad numbers to be 5,000 renters who can afford to buy in the home ownership market. And if you look back, you know, 6 years ago when interest rates were 3% and prices were much less, it was a much higher number of renters who could enter the home ownership market. Median income for a single person in most of the state is probably in the high 60s. It's higher in Chittenden County than the balance of the state. I would guess for a family of 3 or 4, you're often getting into the $90,000 range, but I don't have the numbers in front of me.
One other quick question is 311 includes increasing the PTT, and I always understand some reasons. I also have to kind of don't want to just have a reflexive reaction to the idea of adding to a sales tax on housing. It just feels counterintuitive if you're trying to support housing. Do you have any thoughts on the PTT increase?
Okay, so our funding has been tied since the passage of Act 200 to the property transfer tax. When that was passed, what we did was we actually lowered the rate up to a certain amount of value and then increased the rates for values above that. And I can't recall the details of the proposal in 311, but what we did that way was to make it more progressive and I understand there's been a letter from the realtors about the bill in the other body, but my understanding is if you buy a home up to $625,000, the PTT will actually be lower under the housing bill's proposal than it was otherwise, than it had been, but above 625 will be more. I think the average price of a home last year in Vermont sold was about $315. If I'm recalling that correctly, but check with VHFA because they keep those stats. Price of newly constructed homes is much higher, probably this $1,000.
Can you still pay the property transfer tax in that situation? For a constructed home?
Yes, when you buy a home you.
But when you buy the land, there's no home on it. You construct a house on it, how do you pay the property transfer tax?
Ask one of the folks at JFO or from the tax department, not me.
But they do,
I believe they do, yes, I think you pay a transfer tax. Whether you buy property,
with or without.
with or without, whether you buy a commercial, now, if you own the land and you build a house. You then pay the PTP,
Yeah.
I do not know the answer to that question.
Yeah, because obviously it's, the land would be worth less than what eventually the value of the home would be, but.
What I would say is that in the instance where we're building 4 new units. Condominium units in Woodstock. That when Swin Pine sells those units, somebody will pay the PTT,
Oh,
okay?
yeah, I heard of it.
But if you're.
If you are,
If your mom and dad own land and you built your house on it. Would you pay the PTT? I just don't know the answer to that question.
One other thing is the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund. I don't know where you are these days in terms of receiving 100% of what the law ought to deliver or less. I know that goes up and down.
So, when you look back from the point of the housing revenue bond forward. We've actually gotten more than that formula would provide, and over the last 4 years, because of the presence of ARPA and the appropriation of general fund surpluses. We've done way better. The governor's proposal this year. When you look at property transfer tax and you add in funding from the capital bill and the clean water fund. We're right about at the statutory level. However, our housing budget in the coming year will be the lowest it's been since 2017, because the one-time funding, the ARPA funding, the housing revenue bond is all gone. So we're gonna have between state and federal funds about 85% less to do housing than we've had before, which is why I say, from my perspective, willingness to raise revenue to build more affordable housing absolutely needs to be part of this bill. Again, I believe that we really need to look at the permitting process, look at how much democracy is enough democracy, not eliminate appeals, speed them up. But we will not meet our housing needs without providing more funding so that whether you're a child or whether you're a school teacher or not, you can find a place to live, because the cost is just too high right now in terms of the market and produce.
I know that when we're talking about the NRB, and one of the things I'm interested in asking about is if we're potentially quote unquote like expanding or professionalizing the staff, if we might consider having one of those people be a housing specialist, full time. Akin to having that dedicated housing board of appeals, that person who do not pushing through or bird dogging applications, they could also be the recipient perhaps of new tax appeals.
I'm open to any idea that will speed up the appeals process. I don't care how we do it, I just don't want it to take 2 years and in the case of the end, $2.5 million when the work costs. Again, I'm fine with somebody saying government's made a mistake. But I'd like that not to go on for years and years and several trips to the Supreme Court.
Right. You have the right to ask a question, but it's good to deliver a timely answer that's not so costly. Okay. Down Collington.
I'll try to keep this very short. I agree, and I always have. The idea that the entire permitting process, including appeals, at the local level, at the state level, Act 250, A&R, it should be faster. It should be easier. It should be cheaper. My concern only is that in the pursuit of that goal, that we not lessen the rights of the others to raise issues that they at least have reason to believe are important, and that they may lose, but that they ought to at least get their day in court. And I also, well, I'll just leave it at that.
I don't think we disagree. I guess what I could say to you though is If the community goes for a process and it says. This 10 acres, and especially now that we know we don't want to be building so much in floodplains. Is really where we want to have dense development. And you have a public process to decide that. In which issues around wetlands and stormwater and all that ought to be considered. And you get the regional planning commission to sign off on it, and get the state board to sign off on it. Once you've been through all that. When do we say, okay, we've made those decisions and we're not gonna then appeal every deal that is gonna happen within that designated area? And that's the policy issue I think you have to balance. But you know, the reality is that we will sprawl into the countryside if we don't develop density, right? I know that the HFA's put a big number on housing needs in the state. But if we decide we're gonna build to 6 units an acre. It's not gonna take a huge amount of the Vermont landscape, and you charged us for doing the planning for 30 by 30, 50 by 50. To meet that 30,000 unit goal, if we decide we're gonna do it with some level of density.
Thank you. I'm wondering, in places that have development review boards, do you see, this is a thing that has come up, is that the Act 250 process is duplicative. When it comes to, when we can use the word democracy, I would, based on, teaching my colleague, might modify that word to public process. In your view, in places that have development review boards, is the public process duplicative?
I don't feel like I'm an expert enough. You know, Chris and I both live in the town of Calais, and our DRB has been pretty dysfunctional. And 3 families. Family who'd owned land for years and years and years, their 3 daughters and husbands and kids, school that desperately wanted to build 3 lots. All close together on this 80 acres. And our DRB finally said yes, but it took them about 1.5 years, and it was a disaster to them,
So they
so,
have to go through Act 50 on top of that?
no,
Okay.
no.
But even just that,
I mean, I think that's part of why Act 47 was so important in terms of saying municipalities. You know, it's very hard at the DRB level for people to say no to their neighbors. You've seen that play out with Savings Pasture, which
hard to say no to their neighbors.
say yeah, no. When their neighbor wants something or they want to stop something, it's hard to say no when you're talking, you're just.
If they wanna stop it.
If they want to stop it.
So it's easy to oppose projects at the DRB level.
Yeah, I think that's what happened in Hartford with the shelter project.
I'm intimately familiar with the details of that situation.
You know a whole lot.
Yeah.
What I know outrageous.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but can I just make one point? To that point, the process was very helpful. Because if that location had been built, and I was staunchly in favor of it, my husband used to work for the Haven. My family has utilized the services of the Haven. If we had not had that process, the people living in that community would have been outraged by it being built. So I don't think just getting rid of the process is the solution. So, and I don't think that's what you're suggesting, but I do think there are proponents of this bill who feel like the best thing would be just to throw it all out. So for me, when I think about if there are people who disagree, it's far worse for them to feel, I disagree, I disagree, I disagree, I have no voice. The thing gets built and they go, look at this travesty, I'm so upset, I am the victim now. Versus a process of, here's why we're doing it. Here's a meeting so you can discuss your concerns. Because once you get out those concerns, once those people were able to voice them, it became very apparent the truth that was undergirding all of their concern, which was that they truly didn't want people who were unhoused living near them. And once you get to the root, it was much easier for the community to have a discourse, and it does take time to do that. I think what we're dealing with now is the balance between, do we actually have that time to to kind of unknit some of those long held beliefs that are negative or stigmatized. And I think that's the debate we're having.
I agree with you. We need, and it's part of why Act 47 is so important in saying to municipalities, we must somewhere in the community allow for these kinds of facilities, and it really builds on the legislation a decade ago that says we're not to discriminate based on economic status of anybody who's going to live in the facility. Let me raise just one other issue, which is not in either of the bills that you'll see, but that we have found really problematic, which is the corrective action plan process administered by the Department of Environmental Conservation. And it is taking, as I'm hearing it from developers, 12 to 18 months to work through that process. And maybe there are good reasons for that, but this is something that is in the wheelhouse of this committee, and I would at the very least ask DEC for a report on what they would do to speed that process up. We are spending, and this is the case in Windsor, Vermont, $1 million to remove soils. I don't know, I'm not a scientist.
We hear from Tom Buttershop.
And send them up to coverage. I don't know if they could have been capped, but I know that it took a long time through the corrective action plan process. Similar thing, with the old Sacred Heart site up in Newport, about 18 months. So I don't know why it takes so long. Maybe they're understaffed. Maybe they're not getting answers from developers in a timely manner, but I think it
Something to look into.
behooves all of us to say, can we speed that process up?
And
And do we need to be sending the soils to the landfill?
are these generally over, so were they sites that were characterized as brownfields prior, or there was someone who started to develop soil tests showed some level of contamination, could have been not so
I think it-
significant contamination. There was a problem in Burlington, it's just because once upon a time there were marine generating stations in the neighborhood.
I think it varies, but I think what I'm hearing from developers all the time, so I'm not telling you this is my firsthand experience, is it's taking at least 12 months and sometimes 18 months to work through the corrective action plan process. So if we're all trying to figure out how do we make things happen faster in the right locations, in the case of Windsor, it's a site right next to the diner.
Yeah.
It'll be a good place to develop, but we're spending $1 million to move the soils and making that project far more expensive. So I don't, maybe it's the right thing, but I think it's worthy of investigation.
Well, the term worthy of investigation, I'll go. But I would say that there are levels of how scrupulous an investigation needs to be. I like to get my breakfast in diners. I occasionally visit a bar. I get out among the people. And this kind of conversation, it's the isn't that ridiculous kind of conversation. And you know what the state did now, and you hear about these terribly stupid things, and you look into the actual case, and that's not really what happened. I don't know, I'm not gonna speculate about Windsor. Windsor is a former industrial town that is now pulling itself up by the bootstraps rather heroically, and good for them. But they do have sites that if they're gonna pull this off, they're gonna have to deal with what, at least the possibility that there's pollution there. Again, this is not a bar, this is a legislative chamber, so I'm gonna not speculate. But I don't know what's going on there, and I think finding out about it is a good idea. The fact is, places where former factories were, where people were very casual about getting rid of solvents and stuff like that, needs to be looked at, and perhaps that soil doesn't belong there, and perhaps it would be a mistake to develop on that site.
Well, we've agreed that we're gonna develop on it. It's made it through the process. What I'm saying to you
To
is.
develop on it with the soil.
Could we have capped it if there were PCBs in the soils? Completely agree. And again, I'm not a scientist. I'm just saying it's a very slow process. And so a lot of attention's been focused on Act 250, on local permitting. And I'm just saying, while we are putting programs under the microscope and saying, how can we speed the process up? We need to look at the corrective action plan process because we want to build in those locations. We want people to be able to walk to services that downtown Windsor has to offer. And I think you would know better than me what turnaround in Windsor has been, but we've made several investments over the years in Windsor, and I think they've all been part of that. And I hope that the state finally, does something with the prison site. Because that's a great plan, but it can't,
That's a different conversation.
that's a whole different thing. Windsor is a community with a ton of potential. And we should maximize its potential. Okay.
All right, so thank you so much. The DRV Cal's horror story reminds me of, we've long said in here, good planning is good planning, can happen at any level, not necessarily so wedded to Act 250 that it's the only tool we can bring to the table. But the more we rely on municipalities to take that on, then if you hear like the horror story side of it, or I can think of some things closer to where I live, where the administration of the bylaws was substandard, and so it's like a trust but verify thing or something. And I've always stop there with it. Sometimes it's really can be knock it out of the park at the local level. Sometimes it doesn't work all that well, and it's hard to write a law to see how it's gonna play out.
But just so I'm clear, the community of Putney has permitted and said this is a good project.
Sure.
South Burlington has a new town center invested in moving their library into it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, 600 new apartments are gonna get built in that new town center. So we can do those kinds of things at a grand scale with the right planning that are gonna make a big difference in our lives. And we're seeing lots of people across the state, municipalities providing buildings, Energy Systems is offering land in Heinsberg for housing. We have a big problem in terms of housing our citizens that people want to respond to, and we just need to make it easier to do it.
Sure. Our new projects tend to get taller. Yeah, sometimes I wonder why we're still stuck on 3 stories.
Well, if I use one of your communities as an example, we just opened 20 apartments in Bristol, and it's 2-story buildings, and that was a deal that a private sector developer wanted to do, and he ultimately decided it wouldn't pencil, so we have done it. Bristol has all 2-story buildings. I don't know why we didn't build 3-story buildings. What I would say to you, however, is, we have a project in front of us, or about to come in front of us, from the site that Middlebury College owns. And the developers, we initially said, have you thought about another story? And they did think about it, and then we had to say to them, we're not gonna have enough money this year because Middlebury is not the only project we can do, right, to give you add a 4th story. So I think anytime we can encourage growing taller, that's a good thing. It's also a reason to look at the raising revenue part of this bill, and if you guys decide to enhance it, you certainly have my thanks.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Oh, Senator McCollum.
To establish policy based on what happened in Woodstock strikes me as not the most appropriate way to do so. Even the Olympic judging throws out the cops for because of it's like having some school funding based on the 5-cent property tax rate for education that existed in Stratton. There's when you go there, it's an eye rolling thing. On a more practical question, property transfer tax. Is there a proposal that you know of to tax at a certain rate for the first 400,000 in value, or a different rate for the next 200,000, and then a third rate for above that?
I believe the bill you'll see from the other body has a a gradation, but I do not know the specific terms, but I can look at it and get back to you. And I don't know, I can't speak to the specifics.
So they may be sending that to us.
They plans whether they'll get it over the finish line. I'm gonna be in Ways and Means in a little while, so I can tell you more in a few hours. And I haven't looked at the specifics of how the transfer taxes increased in 311, but that's what you did back in 1988 was you changed the gradation. So you kept it at 0.5% up to a certain value, and you adjusted that about a decade ago and increased the level at which you stayed at the 0.5%, and then you pay a higher rate. And that's why I say the proposal from the other body actually lowers your PTT up to 6, if you buy a house at 625 or less, as I understand it, and increases it above that.
It's at 625. More, 625 lower.
Yes. And I agree with you that Woodstock is the outlier, bad example. But Putney at 2 years is pretty typical when there's, and it's a long time in this market. $2.5 million more for 25 homes is a month.
The PTT adjustments that you see floated out around the building, are they revenue neutral, but more progressive, or they're also trying to make?
Now, they're also trying to raise revenue.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. With that,
You've had some good local examples.
we hear from our friends at the Department of Housing and Community Development. Mr. Cochran, do you want to? Pull two chairs to the table?
Jake, we
or-
go first. We're talking about kind of just real unrelated issues, so take it first and I can just.
Okay,
Hi, Senator Bray.
morning.
So I'm Jake Emmer, I'm the planning and policy manager at the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development, and then unofficially a zoning nerd, not the nerdiest of the nerds, but I've done quite a bit about it. I've been a planning and economic development director, acting as administrator, served in the local planning commission, served as a local elected official, living in the department about 5 years. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on some of the zoning provisions in 311 and some of the work that the department has been doing related to what Gus, I think, eloquently described as communities moving towards or being communities of opportunity. So we recognize through our work with the department, and we assist municipalities in all sorts of ways through grants, through planning. We are in past through funders through the RPCs that that local zoning really needed to modernize. In many ways, it's been stuck in mid-century values of separated uses, large lots, predominantly single family, and in a way that was limiting housing opportunities. And this was something I felt personally as a state employee, moved to Central Vermont from Chittenden County to fulfill the aspiration to be able to buy a home. Wasn't able to purchase a home in Chittenden County. So in terms of how did we start doing this zoning? We contracted with the Congress for Urbanism to develop a zoning guide, and that was all about how do we make it easier for municipalities to update their zoning to welcome new homes in smart places, and it's called the Enabling Better Places that we guided. I think we brought it to the committee in past years.
That your, do you have a book? There was a large book with.
It's the most recent edition.
Wow.
Yeah, it has a lot of pictures of Bristol in it, so. Yeah. And so we did that collaboratively with working with pilot communities throughout the state. And it provides state guidance on how communities can update their zoning to be more welcoming of housing. And it really set the stage for a statewide conversation and more stakeholder conversation about the state enabling legislation, Planning and Development Act. And what's the minimum speed limit that we're going to allow for housing in municipal bylaws? And so the whole act essentially made it easier to build middle homes by making interventions with density, allowed uses, and shelters, saying this is what bylaws need to allow. And then we provided a lot of technical assistance following the of the Home Act including bylaw modernization. So we provided 63 grants to 63 communities over 3 years, almost $100 million. I'm sorry, not 1 million, a little under $1 million to support bylaw modernization. And just a great example of that in Addison County is Virgins, or in Washington County is Waitsfield. Where they've been involved in some of these statewide projects. We've done the Enabling Better Places Guide, the bylaw modernization grants, our Homes for All project that we mentioned last week, when we were in here and putting together a neighborhood development area designation, which all makes it an easier climate to welcome homes. There is, however, still some continued confusion about the provisions that were in the Home Act. And so one of the things that the department is asking is that you take a look at Representative Baumgart's bill 652 technical corrections to the Home Act and see if there are opportunities to bring those into 311 in the market.
They're not ready.
Since that house just did 687, did they not consider incorporating those?
Those were not integrated into that bill. Although many of them are in 311, but there are still some emissions, and we think that some of those emissions would help provide a lot more clarity to municipalities that are wrestling with particularly the density provision of the bill.
All right, so I inquire and when you say missing middle, can you turn that into dollars or how do you, in your area of work, what do you regard as like low income, and then where are we into missing middle, and then I don't know what the next category is.
Yeah, well, actually, it's an artful term in that sometimes it's used to describe income category, so missing middle income. But from planners owner types, it's more likely used to describe a mid-sized housing. So it might be a home with an accessory dwelling, a duplex, a triplex, things that tend to be more naturally affordable, just by nature of the unitization. It's going to create economies of scale and makes it more affordable to rent. No, that's not true in every case. But that's what we are referring to when we refer to missing middle homes. And into that, I used to live on the same block in Senator Watson in Berry City, and did the zoning analysis of all the homes on there to see how many conform to our local zoning. 0 conform fully to our local zoning, and it was
so beginner question, but what was actually there and what was the zoning thing? But
just predominantly single family homes and duplexes present all year round. But they were the standards that are in place locally tend to have reflect those mid-century values. So they have larger setbacks than the buildings were actually built to, whether they be front, side, or rear setbacks. And then it was a zone single family, even though there was a variety of triplexes and duplexes and mixed use buildings on that block. And so that's what a big push for the zoning would come to this, to recognize what we already have on the ground, but also to allow incremental infill. So for new duplexes and accessory dwelling, to find those spaces, open spaces on lots where we can add homes on existing infrastructure. And that's one of the great things about the Home Act, is that it's really meant to smart by focusing on water and sewer service areas.
So that's what to me feels like it's one of those cautionary tales where we do something in zoning, but the real world doesn't look like that horrible. To what degree is the work so is 652 address that kind of disconnect? We plan for zoning like this, but we're actually getting something different. And as an officer, you have great zoning, but if it's not adhered to, you might end up with outcomes that you were less helpful, thought by redoing your zoning.
Yeah, I find that it would help address that by just creating a more permissive standard statewide. For all residential zoning districts.
All right, so I hear again from Mr. Lynn.
You're straight.
Brady, on how the. Where the towns are in terms of billing, the fact that you have 63 grants out is encouraging, and that's a lot of kind of demonstrated interest. Okay, any other questions from you?
No. What about lunch?
You need like a little berry chair or. Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Cochran.
I'm here to get you back on schedule.
That was pretty short.
Yeah. Morning, I'm Chris Clark from the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm here just to talk about well, I will, before I start, I would say agree with Gus Seeley about correcting the language about who should do the study on actual costs. It should be the agency of ag, not the department.
And how is it set down?
It says the department shall do a study on ag soils, ACCD.
Oh, ACCD.
Or DHCD, I can't remember, but it is not our area of expertise. And I don't know how we got in it.
You probably weren't in the room.
Could have been the case. The other thing, while I'm digressing before I even start, there is a study that we do start in there, on land banks. I think it is I won't go into it's a complicated area of policy. It does need, I think, careful review across many titles for it to be enabled, but if we could identify opportunities for land in our downtowns and village centers that are easily cleaned before somebody like VHCD provides grants and when they're ready to go and they're turnkey. I think when we're facing challenges like Barry, like where we put housing there quickly, we've already pre-identified those slots. Got a lot of pieces in place. I think we can get further along down the road. That's for the end of the bill, but it's a directive for DHCD. We're looking to land bank. It's been used in many New England states. And can be very effective. It is one complicated and expensive, so it does take care of the state.
Can you just back up a step and sort of introduce the concept, like who's purchasing, how does it work?
It varies state to state, you know, some municipal, like St. Albans is a good example of kind of effectively a municipally led land bank. They're identifying parcels, cleaning them up. We're selling them to a third-party developer to create housing commercially that's just hold their overall downtown vitality. But the costs and time it takes to hold that property, purchase that property, hold that property. If a public entity can do it, it can speed the process and reduce the risk for the ultimate developer. But there's potentially regional models where you can look at, where do we need housing across the state? Where are these opportunities within these centers? Those RPCs could conceivably hold properties, clean them up and get them ready for use. And there could be a mix of the state and level of engagement and leadership on how to support these kind of.
In terms of those who contaminated the property who currently own before municipality gets involved, are the pockets that might be charged with paying for a cleanup generally, empty by the time we talk about a cleanup? Or
It's good to talk to VC about that. I do know that they have a provision, when you get into the umbrella program, when it's no fault. And that the goal is to clean up the site, so I don't think they hold other people accountable. I would say that in many of our downtown and village centers, the presence of any given activity for a certain amount of time does cause contamination, so it's not necessarily that they were at a coal processing plant.
yeah.
But I would agree with Gus that if there's an opportunity to make that better and faster, this land bank could be part of that strategy to make that better. But before, the point of what I wanted to testify today was about the downtown and village center tax credit program. You don't hear much about it in this committee, it's usually an economic development program, but it's part of the really important funding stack that creates housing, it's vitality within our downtown and village centers. And the governor's, put in an additional $2 million, investment in that program to meet the actual existing demand. That,
Fill us maybe just a little on that program.
yeah, so, stepping back a little bit, this program's been on the books for about I'd say over 20 years, almost 25 years. It was championed by the Preservation Trust of Vermont because the economics of our downtowns, like improving the buildings, didn't make sense. Many of our upper floors were unused because the code said you need to have an elevator. And obviously, the more intensively you use the building, you want fire protection in this building. All these things that you want and need to use these existing buildings came at really high costs. And so when the owner of that property wanted to get a loan from the bank to improve that building, and they looked at what they were taking in as far as their rents, it didn't pencil out. So there needed to be a subsidy to fill that gap. So this is why that program was created. Most of the credits that are invested in these properties are going for code improvements to the buildings. So they want to get them back into productive use. We want to see the grandness of the community improve over time. But without these investments that fully utilize these buildings, it's hard to flip that process over and get that market working again. It's been tremendously successful. You know, it's not been a huge amount of money. The program started with $300,000 and is now up to a $3 million base. The benefits go to communities with our downtown village center designation and on a temporary basis, the neighborhood area designation. This was a 2-year provisional, $2 million increase in addition to the neighborhood areas. That will end without legislative action. In S311, there is the $2 million increase, but not related policy language. However, in the bill coming up in the House, they did the opposite. They removed the increase proposed by the government, but they kept the policy language. So I'm hoping in this community, those pieces can come together. The policy language that we really want to see funded and supported in the Senate is all about adaptation and resilience of our village centers and downtowns. They're all, many, I would say not all, many are river adjacent because that's their history. Our rivers were our transportation system, our rivers create power. So many of them are in flood risk areas. We saw in Montpelier, we saw in Gary. So places that are going to get wet. We have effective strategies. We know how to floodproof these buildings. We know how to reduce their risks. Often what is lacking is the incentive to encourage the building owners to move their utilities out of the cellar, make flood mitigation investments. So when flood happens, it's a 2-week cleanup. If it's not, the business goes from 6 months to a year. Right now, we do have a flood mitigation incentive as a tax credit. However, it is limited to FEMA's flood map areas, and those are not necessarily accurate.
Well, we've heard this.
Yes, very much.
It would be great to hear ANR's exciting support for mapping of these areas.
It's FEMA's mapping process. They're gonna do it on their own timeframe, but they look prospectively at what's happened in the past when they delineate these boundaries. In climate change, we look into the future and it's very uncertain. So one of the changes that we'd like to see your support on is just eliminating, you know, we created a designated downtown area, have all the buildings eligible for this flood mitigation benefit, because the person who owns the building is probably in the best situation to judge his or her own risks when they make an improvement to their building, and we want to be able to provide an incentive. In Montpelier, in various cases, many of the buildings that were not in this special flood hazard area were flooded. We have a lot of people who benefited from these tax credits to improve their buildings and get back on their feet again, but they can't qualify because the barriers to lending is too smaller. So we'd like to liberalize the boundary. And again, that policy language is in the Act 250 that are coming in from the House. The other change is increasing the amount all the credits that we have on that program come up to a certain cap. It's a percentage of your cap. We'd like to increase the cap of the flood mitigation credit from $75,000 to $100,000. Other changes in there specify all the types of activities that are eligible for flood mitigation. So elevating, relocating utilities, filling in the basin, which is often necessary because the water creates pressure and can collapse a little bit. I think these are things that are smart, that we know our Vermont communities need. And we know, FEMA has done investigations into their, an investment in mitigation saves, he said, $1 in saves $6 down the road. And then we need our communities to be more proactive. If we're able to help them weather changing, will change that, but that's fine.
Great. I didn't quite catch the name of the program that funds code improvements, for instance, so you can bring upper stories back on.
It's the downtown Goes tax.
Okay.
So, within that tax incentive program are a bunch of different categories of eligible work. You can fix up the outside of the building. You can, get an additional incentive if you qualify for a federal tax credit for historic buildings. You get a tax credit for general code improvements, fire separations, improving safety, building ramps, making it accessible. You can also qualify for a credit to make flood mitigation. So within the broader program are a bunch of seven types. So more than you wanted to know, but that's.
Never more than you wanted. We have questions galore. Okay, great. Any questions for Mr. Cochran? I don't know.
I know.
I thought you were gonna get it.
Yeah, I know, I got it easy, thank you so much.
We talk about, having ag decide what ag soil. Be in charge of making those decisions.
Yes, I mentioned the rep truck, yes. I think that's a good idea.
So I often wonder when. Listen to ag. Present stuff, whether they consider their job to be to keep farmers farming. Or to keep soils that feed people continue to feed people. And which part of ag are you gonna would you send the soils decision to?
Well, I'm working the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and I think if you had questions about ag soils and ag soil protection and prioritization, it's a very much bigger agency of agriculture through markets.
Yet you're testifying on what's to be done.
Well, in S311 is a provision that said ACCB should look at the ag mitigation soils fees and process and come up with recommendations on how much those soils should cost when we do a mitigation. That's not our expertise. So my recommendation was that ACCB should do this review. This is really the purview of the agriculture department.
On the costs of real estate.
They, as Gus mentioned, you can do offsite mitigation for ag soils, which you're developing in the downtown Rose Center. Annually, the cost of what an acre cost is determined by the Agency of Agriculture. It's not something we do.
But the sale is determined by how much people will pay for uses other than agriculture.
Again, not my Ari Rockman Miller can tell you all about the.
Okay. So you said drifting off the shoulder of the road when you talk about who are we doing this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We will take a break after our next guest, but now let's go on to Zoom. And I think that, and this, so I'm gonna have to ask for help, so I want to learn to pronounce your last name correctly. Can you tell me how you say your last name, please?
Kibwe, Sandrine Kibwe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
guessing right, but I didn't want to just be guessing.
Thank you for this.
The floor is yours.
I am going to share my screen. I have a little presentation for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you see it
Yeah, we can see it.
clearly? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me today before this committee to discuss S311. But I will be focusing on section 47 with the 400,000 appropriation to CVOEO for rental stabilization services, and section 62 with 1 million appropriation to CVOEO for mobile home technical assistance.
Thank you for that. Not everyone hears us so clearly to where we should be looking in the bill.
Oh, thank you. Can I move forward?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. So for a little bit of background, again, my name is Sandrine Kibwe. I am the Director of Housing Advocacy Program at the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, CVOEO, who is one of the state 5 community action agencies that serve the western part of Vermont. But CVOEO serves about 22,000 Vermonters a year, and runs 13 regional programs and 5 statewide housing advocacy programs. And its expertise, proven successful in comprehensive housing support program, as well as its relationship with vulnerable communities, is well known and respected. As I told you, I am the director of the 5 housing advocacy programs that includes Vermont Tenants, Mobile Home Program, the Fair Housing Project, the Home Family Voucher Program, and the statewide Asylum Seeker Assistance Program. We operate 2 hotlines supporting more than 1,700 tenants and mobile home residents with tenancy issues each year. We educate more than 400 renters and mobile home residents about their rights and responsibilities so they can gain skills to maintain healthy and safe housing. We also provide consultation, information, referrals, education, advocacy, and technical assistance for more than 800 community members, municipal officials, and housing and services providers about fair housing law each year. One of the unique program addition that we have here at CVOEO is that we have embedded language accessible housing, education, and financial services that are provided directly to services recipients in the language they speak through our new expanded community ambassador programs. So right now I'm going to pivot and speak a bit about section 47 with the 400,000 appropriation to CVOEO. First and foremost, I have to tell you that CVOEO support measure investment in both the production of and access to affordable and middle income housing, as well as the investments in housing prevention and retention support services included in S311. We also strongly support the fundamentals of rental financial assistance, legal assistance, along with comprehensive support services as an effective houselessness prevention and housing retention tool. Housing advocacy programs also, we have existing structures, services, and system in place to provide the crucial relief needed, not only to tenants, but also to address issues presented by landlords. So this appropriation will facilitate the creation of an Office of Rental Housing Stabilization Services that will support and ensure long-term solutions to Vermont housing and homelessness crisis with preventing or preserving tenancy and avoiding eviction. We do believe that the statewide support, educative and advocacy service will not only be cost effective, but also erase unnecessary barriers that we know actually preclude many vulnerable Vermonters to access services. It will promote direct connection to the most vulnerable and make access to fairer and more inclusive services. Therefore, it will give the state a better run in its investment. So what will 400,000 do? It will support 4 full-time employees to be hired with 1 supervisor and 3 benefit specialists or support services specialists to be hired. And this $400,000 includes all direct project implementation and administration costs. So it includes, background fees, office supplies, postage, and insurance, service contract, and all. But then the question will be, what will we provide? So we intend to provide one-on-one assistance. And if you see in that graph right here, it will tell you, and I don't know if you can see it clearly, but I hope really that you can, because this actually is a cycle of services that we are able to provide. And again, I want to make sure that you are aware of this very important aspect of language access that is really needed in our now very diverse community in Vermont. And of course, the tie with legal assistance services and the rental financial assistance program. This will be definitely the cycle that we make our most vulnerable being able to sustain, not only sustain, but to avoid any type of homelessness at this point here in time in their housing journey.
Ms. Kimway, I have a question. So it says services to be provided. Are all the services you're already providing and you're looking to continue them or further develop them? So I'm just trying to understand what's going on now versus where you're hoping to be going.
Yes, so the HAP right now, like I said, provide this type of services through their hotlines. The problem is capacity, the problem is time. In order for us to be really effective, because we have seen that all this effort and all this investment when it comes to support most vulnerable Vermonters in the space of possible eviction or actually being definitely homeless or in jeopardy of losing their housing. Support services are very important. What we want really to do here is to make sure that the access is available. And because, yes, the access is available, we do need capacity in order for us to do that. At this point here, we are somewhat limited by time, we are limited by capacity to do the work effectively to support the community. And again, we have been advocating for years that a central point of information referral and support is needed at this point. We have seen it with the flood, natural disasters was definitely an example to see that people were actually calling us to find out about information and support services and resources available to them. But again, the capacity is not necessarily there to follow up and make them support them in accessing those services.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I am going to pivot and talk about Section 62, the Mobile Home Technical Assistance Appropriation. It's a $700,000 for mobile phone technical assistance, and then $300,000 would be for direct service. So I I want to talk to you a little bit about our mobile home program. I don't know if you know about our statewide mobile home program, but it is dedicated to empowering mobile home residents through direct support, community organizing, education, while working to protect and improve their housing rights and living conditions. So to give you a perspective about the community we are working with, so approximately 6% of Vermont housing units are mobile homes in Vermont. And with about 10,691 located on owned land and about 9,794 located on leased land. As of December 2023, the Department of Housing and Community Development Registry reports that 238 registered mobile home parks in the state contain 7,104 lots and 6,661 mobile homes, including 327 vacant lots. So this is the population we're working with. Our program right now, as funded, works exclusively with mobile home residents that lives on in mobile home parks, registered mobile home parks at that. Administrative barriers and complicated processes, we know that historically, prevent mobile home owners from accessing otherwise applicable state funds for basic needs, like ensure they have clean water or a functional septic service, the replacement or safety or ability of their home. So furthermore, major current flooding disasters have deepened a housing crisis in our state, and it has been experienced by mobile home residents tragically. That's a fact. And the need for essential housing support services and further response and recovery effort is crucial. So I'm going to just talk about the 700,000, but first I want to tell you a little bit about the composition of the mobile home program team. So we currently have 4 full-time employees, and we mostly work in serving the needs of the vulnerable communities residing in mostly located in nonprofit mobile home parks and cooperative. And a few found sometimes in some of the most remote area of the state. But due to capacity issues, a CVAO ability to reach out and support residents in private parks and on land has been limited or inexistent. So that leaves thousands of vulnerable communities without needed support. So by investing in this expansion of technical assistance services, we would ensure that current and forthcoming state resources are brought the last mile to vulnerable mobile home communities and provide support effort locally and crucially serve as a repository for critical knowledge, ensuring effective support, dissemination of information, especially during natural disasters, and more efficient management of the many complex situations and challenges experienced by mobile home communities. All right, so 700,000 mobile home technical assistance appropriation will do exactly what is seen here. I hope that you can see the graph as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So, like I said, the 700,000 appropriation is to expand CVAO technical assistance service. Would hire 7 full-time employees. And this funding would guarantee technical and direct navigation and or coordination of support services for approximately 500 vulnerable household living in mobile home parks. And that's mobile home parks, a mobile home resident that actually have their home on rented or owned lands. And they will be in mobile home or private parks. So all the mobile home community will be able actually to access this service. We'll have one full-time technical assistance coordinator. And it will be located or housed at the main office at CVOEO. 6 technical assistance specialists will be placed around the state of Vermont. And we have focused on the area where mobile home parks are the most, mobile home residents are the most concentrated. So we have one full-time position that will be located in Tri-Park Cooperative Housing Corporation in Brattleboro. Tri-Park is the largest and subsidized provider of affordable housing in the state, with a total of 310 lots. We have one full-time at the CVOEO Addison Community Action Program, where the second largest mobile home park concentration is known, with the Addison Housing Works, a former SCCT, that actually have a total of 200 lots. And then the 4 remaining full-time technical assistant specialists will be actually placed around the 4 remaining community action agencies, to say Brock, Capstone, SAFECA, and NECA. So services to be provided, and again, if you have the question and ask about if we do provide this service already, yes. But as I've explained before, you have seen the number of community members residing on mobile home parks that are in need of support service, and the number of people actually we have working statewide currently in our mobile home program team. But focusing on that specific expansion, we will be providing one-on-one assistance, direct referral, follow-up services, education, cooperative development support, park closure support, park sales support, community outreach, flood response, and recovery support and case management being one of them. So focusing on 300,000 emergency grant appropriation, this is for direct service to individual residents. So of course it would be income eligible at 80% of area median income. And this will be to avoid loss of or unsafe housing at this time here. This will serve as an urgent gap need, not presently met, and or available to hundreds of vulnerable residents, especially the elderly with fixed income. So the proposition is to have direct financial support, so help with property taxes. As you know, mobile home usually with bad taxes issues, they might have their home actually put on sale by the town because of back taxes. We have been helping several mobile homeowners at this point here with thousands of dollars in back property taxes because they were on the verge to have their home taken from them, unfortunately, and be sold. So this is a recurrent and common need that we see. Relocation, moving costs, meaning that you disconnect the mobile home from utilities connections, and then you reconnect them, you transport them and reconnect them to a different location. This specific service is definitely needed for mobile home owners that are wanting to move from their current location of flood area to a more safe location. And this is not covered anywhere. So all this gap funding that I'm talking about right now is a resource that is not provided anywhere at this point here, but through loans, which we know that with the current, the average income of mobile home park residents is definitely not more than 80% at this point here, majority. And of course, seeing gap funding with electricity, water, and sewer repairs. We have the mobile home improvement program at this point here running. But this specific funding is because we have seen many over the years, many mobile homes, mobile homeowners coming to us with specific needs when it comes to electricity or water or sewer issues. I should have put in the graph to show you where the mobile home owner responsibility starts and where the mobile home park owner then responsibility lies, because there is definitely a connection between the two where that portion of the mobile homeowner is definitely not usually support accessible to them. It is costly because you need a specialized in the field in which they need such an electrician or a plumber to come and then do the assessment. And then they have to be actually knowledgeable when it comes to mobile home built and structure in order for them to do to make it so it is safe then to use. So this is definitely something that is needed. All that we have presented, I've presented to you here is based on what we have seen on the ground, working all this time, all these years, because we have been established since 1982. And we have been working on the ground with mobile home residents when it comes to assessing their needs, and then actually making sure that our services reflect and efficiently meet those needs. So I think that this is where I am going to stop and wait for your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if you've already sent your presentation to our committee assistant.
Yes.
Right, that way we can put it on our website and we go back to it. For the first 7 weeks of this session, maybe, our committee worked on the Flood Safety Act. And we know we have years of work ahead in the state to be smarter about planning around development period across the board around floodplains and river corridors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering how that work intersects with the work you're doing. Of course, we're interested in trying to ensure that we help people move out of harm's way. If they're in it is one conversation for hardened structures that are in those locations, so they're less damaged by anticipated flooding. And then the third piece would, let's not add to the problem by putting new things in harm's way, or that new things could exacerbate the flooding consequences for neighbors. So a lot of interest came, we're aware that mobile home parks have been in some places particularly vulnerable to flooding. So can you help us learn a little more about how do you look at mobile home parks and flooding? And then I guess I should add one more thing into that whole sandwich, and that is, we also know that for lots of people, that is where they live. They want to stay in their home. They want to stay with their neighbors. So can you fill us in a little bit on how you think about that whole challenge?
Yes, you cannot force people to move away from their homes. And again, it's not necessarily, in my point of view, it's not necessarily to say you are living in a flood zone, so you need to move. But the question is to move where. Do you relocate one resident, or do you relocate the whole community? If it is your whole community, where do you actually move them to? That specific conversation, and this is where we have seen a very slow start when it comes to all the infrastructure money that was put in mobile home improvement parks. It's because the conversation has not been actually really the environment was not created to actually discuss that a little bit more. We have talked about community engagement and community participation to this type of initiatives.
Yeah,
It's always better to do it before actually to invest money into large projects like that. But what we have heard is this. Yes, the flood zone is somewhat at this time, especially with climate change, it's not an ideal space or an ideal place to be. The thing that is that they have remediation on how to make actually their stay safer, such as, you know, elevation of the homes, put slabs on and elevate the homes, or even an emergency preparedness plan put in place where they might be able to actually to enact as a response during those disasters. So and you have some other park residents that they are willing, but again, it's rare because it is a community. This is definitely a different type of dynamic that mobile home parks communities are living in. So the discussion about relocation of parks is definitely a discussion that need to be had. But the proper process in which it needs to actually start is first and foremost to know how you would justify or how you would make it that process so it is actually appealing, because you cannot force them to do so.
sure. Well, and so 213, the Flood Safety Act starts with, goes really through 3 phases. It starts with map, then taking those maps out and ground truthing with the communities, and then once that learning has happened and the maps improve, then you can do rulemaking or bylaws based on all that learning and that better data and all those conversations. And so I don't know if you feel like you've looked at 213 enough to know that you're feeling like, okay, so the overarching plans that we're talking about are on the right track. I'm also thinking though, in the near term, like this coming year and the year after, we'll still be in that startup phase, right? We'll still be doing mapping and we'll still be just getting started on those community conversations. So I'm thinking, figure out on 213, are we on the right track? And how do we manage the next 2 years before that 213 really starts to help us?
Right. So I do strongly believe that everything that actually is designed and implemented with the community engagement and participation it's actually a way to success. Right. So 213 it's a plan that would go hopefully the way in which the community is on board with it. I do think that the proper process here, which is stipulated, is yes to start the conversation and then move forward into implementation and then assessment along the way. As we know, human beings are ever changing. So one thing that we usually done is we do ask for participation, and once we get the information, unfortunately, we do not go back in order for us to get the feedback from what we think we have heard, or we think that is what is wanted or what was understood. So the process is definitely costly. I think that this is something that needs to happen, must happen, especially for mobile home residents. They are eager to participate to the conversation. It's not like the community doesn't know in what dire situation they are in. Flooding is not a game. They have seen their house wiped out. They have seen their belongings wiped out, destroyed. So this is a serious conversation, and this is a conversation that needs to be happening. So yes, to your question, I think that it is going in the right direction. Community engagement and participation is a must. to actually address and inform on how to better design and how to be better implement than moving forward.
Sure, great, well, thank you, you know, I think we've reminded ourselves of the saying that we put for a year to it, is nothing about us without us, you know, and
Mhm.
and that's not only for the mobile home parks we're talking about, but for every municipality.
Correct.
Outreach that's gonna be part of T13 will take here, there's gonna be a lot of conversation, so,
Definitely.
yeah, okay. Any questions from the committee?
I will say one comment, I was very happy to see Sevka on the list, that you'll be working with, so that's great, thank you for partnering with them.
Well,
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that the other day when we ran out of time. Thank you for coming back and thanks for speaking with us today and sharing the information.
Oh, I appreciate, it was worth waiting for. I really wanted to talk to you about this because I know that those sections are very small and not really give you much information. So I'm pleased to have been able to come and then tell you a little bit more about what we were thinking when we were asking for this appropriation.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.